The storm hit like a judgment from God himself, turning the world into a howling white void that swallowed everything in its path. And Margot Fletcher knew if she did not find shelter within the next few minutes, she would die out here on the Wyoming plains. Her horse stumbled beneath her, breath coming in ragged gasps that frosted immediately in the frigid air. She could barely see 3 feet ahead through the driving snow, her fingers numb even inside her gloves, her face burning with cold despite the scarf wrapped around it. She had been riding for 2 days straight from Cheyenne, carrying the deed to her late father's mining claim in Opal, and she had thought herself tough enough to handle whatever the territory threw at her. Pride, she realized now, was a sin that got people killed. Through the white curtain ahead, a dark shape emerged. A building. Margot urged her failing horse forward, hope surging through her frozen limbs. As they drew closer, she could make out the outline of a barn, solid and real against the screaming wind. She did not see a house nearby, but the barn meant civilization, meant someone owned this land, meant shelter from the storm that threatened to bury her alive. She half fell from the saddle when they reached the barn door, her legs barely holding her weight. With shaking hands, she wrestled the door open just wide enough to lead her horse inside, then shoved it closed against the wind. The sudden absence of that howling gale felt like a blessing. The barn was dark and cold, but at least it was dry. Margot could hear other animals moving in the shadows, the low sound of cattle shifting in their stalls. Her horse stood with its head hanging low, exhausted. She needed to tend to the animal, but her fingers would not work properly. She fumbled with the saddle straps, cursing under her breath. "That horse looks about done in." Margot spun around, her hand flying to the small pistol at her hip, though her frozen fingers could barely grip it. A man stood in the barn doorway she had not noticed, one that must lead to the house. He was tall and broad-shouldered, silhouetted against lamplight from behind him. In the dim light, she could make out a strong jaw, dark hair, and eyes that seemed to assess her situation in a single glance. "I am sorry," she said quickly, her teeth chattering. "The storm, I needed shelter. I will pay you for the use of your barn." The man stepped forward, and she could see him better now. He was perhaps 27 or 28, wearing a thick wool shirt and work pants, his face weathered by sun and wind in the way of men who spent their lives outdoors. There was something solid about him, something that spoke of capability and strength. "You will freeze to death out here," he said, his voice deep and matter-of-fact. "Barn is not heated. You can stay in my home instead." Margot hesitated. She had been raised to be cautious of strangers, especially men she encountered alone in isolated places. But the cold was already seeping back into her bones, and she knew he was right. The barn might keep the wind off, but it would not keep her warm enough to survive a storm like this. "I do not want to impose," she managed to say. "You will impose more if I have to bury you come morning," he replied, but there was no harshness in his tone. "I am Samuel Frost. This is my ranch. And you look like you are about 2 minutes from keeling over, so how about we get you inside and warmed up before we worry about proper introductions?" There was such straightforward kindness in his words that Margot felt her resistance crumble. "Margot Fletcher," she said. "And yes, thank you." Samuel moved to her horse with practiced efficiency. "I will take care of your animal. You get inside. Through that door straight ahead. Fire is going in the main room." "I should help," Margot protested, but her body betrayed her by swaying where she stood. "You should not pass out in my barn," Samuel countered. "Go on. I have been tending horses since I could walk. Yours will be fine." Margot's pride wanted to argue, but her survival instinct was stronger. She made her way to the door Samuel had emerged from, stepping into a small mudroom and then into the warmth of the house beyond. The heat hit her like a physical thing, and she gasped at the sudden contrast. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall of the main room, flames crackling cheerfully behind an iron grate. The room was simply furnished but clean, with a worn sofa, a large wooden table and braided rugs on the floor. She stood in front of the fire, holding her shaking hands toward the heat. Slowly, painfully, feeling began to return to her fingers and toes. She unwrapped the scarf from her face and pulled off her hat, revealing dark brown hair that had come loose from its pins during the desperate ride. She was 23 years old, tall for a woman, with gray eyes and features that her mother had once called handsome rather than pretty. Right now, she imagined she looked half dead, her face red and chapped from the cold, her clothes soaked through with melting snow. Samuel came in a few minutes later, stomping snow from his boots. "Your horse will make it," he said. Gave him some feed and rubbed him down. "He is a good animal, tough." "Thank you," Margot said. Her voice came out stronger now that she was warming up. "I owe you, that storm came up so fast." "They do that out here," Samuel said, moving to a cabinet and pulling out 2 tin cups. He poured coffee from a pot sitting on the stove, black and strong. He handed her a cup and she wrapped both hands around it gratefully. "You said you are Margot Fletcher?" "Yes." "And you were headed where in this weather?" "Opal," she said. "My father had a mining claim there. He died 3 months ago in Denver. I only just got word and made the arrangements to come claim what was his." Samuel's expression softened with sympathy. "I am sorry for your loss. But you picked a hell of a time to travel. It is early December. Storms like this are common." "I know. I needed to get here before someone else tried to claim the land. There was some question about the legal ownership, and I was told that possession matters in territorial disputes." She took a sip of the coffee and it burned all the way down in the best possible way. "I thought I could make it. I am used to hard travel." "Where are you from?" "Denver, most recently. Before that, St. Louis. Before that, Virginia. We moved around a lot after my mother died." Father was always chasing the next opportunity. There was more bitterness in her voice than she intended. Samuel studied her for a moment, and she had the sense of being truly seen, not just looked at. "Well, you are alive, which means you are tougher than most. But you cannot travel to Opal in this. Storm will last at least a day, maybe 2. You will stay here until it passes. I cannot impose on you like that." "You can and you will," Samuel said firmly. "I am not sending anyone back out into that. Besides, my place is on the way to Opal from this direction. Once the storm clears, I will take you there myself. I need to pick up supplies anyway." Margot wanted to protest, to insist on her independence, but she was exhausted and still cold to her core, and the thought of sleeping somewhere warm and safe was too tempting to refuse. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I will pay you for your hospitality." "You will do no such thing," Samuel said. "Now, you are soaked through. I will find you something dry to wear while your clothes dry by the fire. It will just be an old shirt and some pants, but at least they will be warm." He disappeared into what she assumed was his bedroom, leaving Margot standing by the fire. She looked around the room more carefully now. It was the home of a man who lived alone, she could tell, practical rather than decorative, but it was not dirty or neglected. The floors were swept, the dishes were clean and stacked neatly. A bookshelf in the corner held perhaps 24 books, their spines worn from reading. That surprised her. Many of the ranchers and cowboys she had encountered could barely write their names. Samuel returned with a bundle of clothes. "There is a room just off the kitchen you can change in," he said, pointing. "Used to be a pantry, but I converted it to a spare room when my sister visited last year. It is small, but it has a bed and it is warm." The room was indeed small. barely larger than a closet, but it had a narrow bed with a thick quilt and a small window that currently showed nothing but white. Margot changed quickly, her fingers still clumsy with cold. Samuel's shirt hung on her like a dress, and she had to roll the pants up several times to keep from tripping over them. She caught a scent from the fabric, something clean and masculine, wood smoke and soap and something else she could not quite name. When she emerged, Samuel had ladled stew into 2 bowls from a pot on the stove. "It is just venison and vegetables," he said. "Nothing fancy." "It smells like heaven," Margot said honestly, and was rewarded with a small smile from him. They sat at the table and ate. The stew was simple but good, hearty and filling. Outside, the wind howled and threw snow against the windows, but inside it was warm and quiet except for the crackling of the fire and the soft sounds of their meal. "So you run this ranch alone?" Margot asked after a while. "Mostly," Samuel said. "I have a hand who comes in during calving season and roundup, but otherwise it is just me. I have about 200 head of cattle, some horses. It is enough. That is a lot of work for one man. I am used to it. I have been running this place since my father died 6 years ago. He built it up from nothing, came out here in '54 when this was still just open range, claimed the land, built the house and barn, survived the hard winters and the dry summers. When he passed, I inherited it." He paused, looking down at his bowl. "My mother died when I was young. Sister married a man in Laramie 2 years back, so now it is just me." There was loneliness in those words, though Samuel said them matter-of-factly. Margot understood loneliness. She had been alone since her father died, had felt alone even before that, if she was honest with herself. Her father had loved her in his way, but he had been chasing dreams her whole life, always looking toward the next horizon instead of at what was right in front of him. "How old are you?" she asked, then immediately felt her face heat. "I am sorry. That was rude." 28, Samuel said, seemingly unbothered. "And you?" 23. He nodded, as if this confirmed something he had been thinking. They finished their meal in companionable silence, and then Samuel showed her where to hang her wet clothes to dry. By the time everything was arranged, Margot could barely keep her eyes open. The warmth, the food, and the exhaustion of the past days were catching up with her all at once. "You should sleep," Samuel said. "You look dead on your feet." "What about you?" Margot asked. "I have taken your spare room." "I sleep out here most nights anyway," he said, gesturing to the sofa. "Closer to the fire. The bedroom is colder, you take the small room. Bed is more comfortable than that couch." Margot wanted to argue, but another wave of exhaustion washed over her. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. You saved my life tonight." "Just being neighborly," Samuel said, but there was something in his eyes, a warmth that made her heart do a strange little skip. "Sleep well, Margot Fletcher." She retreated to the small room and closed the door, then crawled under the thick quilt. The bed was narrow but comfortable, and the room was warm. Outside, the storm raged on, but she was safe. As she drifted off to sleep, her last thought was of Samuel Frost, standing in the firelight with snow melting in his dark hair, looking at her with those steady, kind eyes. She woke to daylight filtering through the small window, or what passed for daylight through the continuing snowfall. The storm had not let up. She could hear the wind still howling, though perhaps not quite as viciously as the night before. She lay still for a moment, getting her bearings. Her body ached from the hard ride, but she was warm and dry and alive. That was more than she had expected 12 hours ago. She rose and dressed in her own clothes, which had dried overnight by the fire. They were wrinkled and still slightly damp in places, but they were hers and they fit properly. She could hear movement in the main room, the sounds of someone tending a fire and moving pots around. When she emerged, Samuel was at the stove, cooking something that smelled wonderful. He looked up and nodded. "Morning. How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in weeks," Margot admitted. "Is that bacon and eggs?" "Chickens are still laying, thank God. Coffee is fresh if you want some." Margot poured herself a cup and stood by the window, looking out at the white world beyond. Snow had drifted up against the side of the house, and the wind continued to blow it into strange, sculpted shapes. "How long do you think the storm will last?" "Hard to say. Could blow through by tonight, could go another full day. We will know better come afternoon." He glanced at her. "You in a terrible hurry to get to Opal?" "I need to file the claim," Margot said. "But I suppose another day or two will not make much difference. The claim office will not be open in this weather anyway." They ate breakfast together, and then the day stretched out before them. There were chores to be done, Samuel explained. Animals to be tended, snow to be cleared from the barn door so it would not freeze shut, firewood to be brought in. Margot insisted on helping, and though Samuel protested at first, he eventually gave in. They bundled up and went out into the storm together. The cold was still brutal, but having been through the worst of it yesterday, Margot felt more prepared for it now. They made their way to the barn, where her horse and Samuel's cattle were waiting. Samuel showed her how he had arranged feed for the animals, how he kept the water from freezing solid, the particular concerns of keeping livestock alive through a Wyoming winter. Margot had grown up in cities for the most part, but her father had dragged her through enough rough camps and frontier towns that she was not completely useless. She learned quickly, and Samuel seemed pleasantly surprised by her willingness to work. They labored side by side, and Margot found herself stealing glances at him when she thought he was not looking. There was something compelling about him, something beyond just his physical strength or the obvious competence with which he handled every task. It was the way he moved through the world with quiet confidence, never wasting energy on bluster or show. He simply did what needed to be done. By the time they returned to the house, they were both covered in snow and breathing hard from the work. They shed their outer layers in the mudroom and returned to the warmth of the fire. Samuel made more coffee and they sat at the table, hands wrapped around the warm cups. "You are good with animals," Samuel said. "Most city folk are scared of cattle." "My father was a lot of things, but he taught me not to be scared of hard work or large animals," Margot said. "Besides, your cattle are gentle compared to some of the mules I dealt with in the mining camps." "You spent time in mining camps." "More than I wanted to." Father was always convinced the next claim would be the big one. It never was. She stared into her coffee. "The claim in Opal is different, though. A friend of his wrote to me after he died, said it was actually valuable. Said father had finally struck something real, but died before he could file the proper papers. I do not know if it is true, but I have to find out." "What will you do if it is valuable?" Samuel asked. "Sell it, probably. Take the money and go somewhere civilized, maybe San Francisco. Start over somewhere I can wear a dress without worrying about it getting destroyed by mud or snow." But even as she said it, the dream felt hollow somehow, less appealing than it had a week ago. "You do not strike me as someone who would be happy in a drawing room," Samuel said. Margot looked at him sharply. "You do not know me." "No," he agreed. "But I know that look in someone's eyes. You are running towards something maybe, but I think you are also running away, and running away never works. The things you are trying to escape have a way of following you." His words struck too close to home, and Margot felt her defenses rise. "And what would you know about it? You have been here your whole life in one place, doing the same thing year after year." She expected him to get angry, but Samuel just shrugged. "You are right." I have been here most of my life, but I chose to stay. My sister left, and I do not blame her for that. She wanted a different life. But I stayed because this place matters to me, because the work matters, because building something that lasts, something real that matters too. He met her eyes. I am not saying you should not go to San Francisco or wherever else you want to go. I am just saying make sure you are going towards something you want, not just away from something you do not. Margot did not know what to say to that. She felt exposed, like Samuel had looked past all her careful defenses and seen something true about her that she had not wanted to admit even to herself. She stood up abruptly. I need to check on my horse. I checked on him an hour ago. He is fine. Then I will do something else. She felt foolish and young, and she hated it. Samuel's expression softened. I did not mean to pry. I apologize. No, you are right, and I hate that you are right. Margot laughed, but it came out bitter. I have been running for so long I do not even know what I am running from anymore, or what I am running toward. I just know I cannot seem to stop. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop running, Samuel said quietly. Stand still. Let yourself feel whatever it is you are trying not to feel. They looked at each other across the small room, and something passed between them, some current of understanding and recognition. Margot felt her heart beating faster, felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. The moment broke when a particularly strong gust of wind rattled the windows, reminding them both of the storm still raging outside. Samuel cleared his throat. I have some books, if you are interested, might help pass the time. Margot was grateful for the change of subject. What kind of books? Bit of everything. Some Shakespeare, some Dickens, some histories. A few dime novels I am not particularly proud of. He smiled, and it transformed his face, made him look younger and less careworn. They spent the afternoon reading, sitting in comfortable silence on opposite ends of the room. Margot chose a volume of Shakespeare's sonnets and found herself reading the same passages over and over, her mind not on the words but on the man across from her. Every so often she would look up and find Samuel watching her, and he would quickly look back down at his book, a faint color rising in his cheeks. The storm began to ease as evening approached. The wind died down to a steady blow rather than a howl, and the snow fell more gently. Samuel made dinner, refusing Margot's offers of help, and they ate beef and potatoes with canned beans. It was simple food, but good, and Margot found herself thinking that she could get used to this, to quiet evenings by the fire with good food and good company. That thought frightened her more than the storm had. After dinner, they sat by the fire and talked. Samuel told her about the ranch, about the rhythms of the seasons, about the year the drought nearly killed all his cattle, and the year the wolves came down from the mountains, and he had to stand guard every night for a month. He talked about his father, who had been stern but fair, and his mother, who had died when he was 8 and who he barely remembered except for her singing. He talked about his sister, who wrote him letters from Laramie full of news about her children and her happy life. Margot found herself telling him things she had not told anyone. About her mother, who had died when Margot was 15, worn down by following her husband's dreams instead of her own. About the succession of shabby boarding houses and mining camps, the constant moving, the way her father would come home either elated with hope or crushed by disappointment, with no middle ground. About the loneliness of being always the new person in town, never staying long enough to make real friends, never having a place that felt like home. Is that what you want? Samuel asked. A home? I do not know, Margot said honestly. I think I stopped letting myself want things a long time ago. It seemed easier that way, safer, but not happier. No, she admitted, not happier. They sat in silence for a while, watching the fire burn low. Finally, Samuel stood and stretched. "We should get some sleep. Storm should be clear enough by morning that we can make it to Opal. It is only about 10 miles from here." Margot felt a strange sinking feeling in her chest at the thought of leaving, which was ridiculous. She barely knew this man. She had been here less than 2 days. And yet the thought of walking out that door tomorrow and probably never seeing Samuel Frost again felt like losing something precious. "Thank you," she said, standing, "for everything. You did not have to be so kind to a stranger." "You are not a stranger anymore," Samuel said, and there was something in his voice that made her breath catch. "Are you, Margot?" "No," she whispered. "I suppose not." They stood there, just looking at each other, and Margot felt the air between them charge with something electric. She saw Samuel's hand twitch, like he wanted to reach for her but was holding himself back. She wanted him to reach for her. She wanted it with a sudden fierce intensity that shocked her. But Samuel just nodded good night and turned away, and Margot retreated to the small room, her heart pounding. She lay in bed, staring at the dark ceiling, and knew that something had changed in her during these 2 days in Samuel Frost's house. Something fundamental had shifted, and she did not think she could shift it back, even if she wanted to. The morning dawned clear and brutally cold. The sky was a hard, brilliant blue, and the sun glinted off snow that lay thick over everything. It was beautiful in a harsh way, the kind of beauty that could kill you if you were not careful. Samuel was already up when Margot emerged from her room, packing supplies into a saddlebag. "We will take my horse," he said. "Yours should rest another day after that run yesterday. I will bring him to you in Opal tomorrow or the next day once he has recovered fully." "You do not have to do that," Margot said. "I want to," Samuel said simply, and something in the way he looked at her made her heart flutter. They ate a quick breakfast, and then Samuel saddled his horse, a large bay gelding that stood calmly while Samuel loaded supplies and then helped Margot mount. Samuel swung up behind her, and suddenly they were very close, his chest against her back, his arms coming around her to hold the reins. Margot could feel the warmth of him even through their thick coats, could smell that same clean masculine scent she had noticed on his clothes. "Ready?" Samuel asked, his voice close to her ear. "Ready," Margot managed to say, though her voice came out breathier than she intended. They set out across the snow-covered plains. The horse moved carefully, finding solid footing beneath the drifts. The journey was slow but steady. Samuel guided the horse with easy confidence, occasionally pointing out landmarks, telling her stories about the land they passed through. As they rode, Margot became increasingly aware of every point of contact between them. The solid warmth of his body behind hers, the strength of his arms on either side of her, the way he adjusted his position to help keep her balanced. It felt intimate in a way that made her pulse race. "Margot," Samuel said after they had been riding for perhaps half an hour. "Can I ask you something, of course? What will you do if the mining claim turns out to be worthless? Or if someone else has already taken it?" Margot had been trying not to think about that. "I do not know. Find work somewhere, I suppose. I can read and write and keep accounts." "Surely someone needs a clerk or a bookkeeper." "What if?" Samuel paused and she felt him take a breath. "What if you did not have to figure it out alone?" Margot's heart started beating very fast. "What do you mean?" "I mean, hell, I am no good at this." Samuel stopped the horse and carefully dismounted, then reached up to help Margot down. They stood facing each other in the snow, the horse's reins in Samuel's hand. "I know we have only known each other 2 days. I know that is not enough time to really know someone. But Margot, I have never felt like this before, like I found something I did not even know I was looking for." Margot could hardly breathe. "Samuel." "Let me finish," he said, and there was almost pleading in his voice. "I am not asking you to marry me right this second. I am not that much of a fool. But I am asking if maybe, after you settle your business in Opal, you might consider coming back to the ranch. Spend some time. Get to know me properly. Give this, whatever this is between us, a chance to grow into something real." Margot's mind was whirling. Every practical bone in her body was screaming that this was insane. You did not make life decisions based on 2 days with a stranger, no matter how kind he was or how safe he made you feel. But there was another voice, quieter but more insistent, that said this was exactly what she had been searching for her entire life. A place to belong, someone who saw her and wanted her anyway. A home. "I am scared," she whispered. "Me too," Samuel admitted. "Terrified, actually, but I think sometimes the best things are scary, because they matter, because they are real." Margot looked up at him, at his strong, weathered face, at his eyes that held such unexpected gentleness. She thought about the past 2 days, about the easy way they had worked together and talked together and existed together. She thought about how the idea of never seeing him again made her chest hurt. She thought about what he had said, about running away versus running toward something. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will come back. I will give this a chance." The smile that spread across Samuel's face was like the sun coming out. He reached for her hand, and even through their gloves she could feel the warmth and strength of him. "You will not regret it," he said. "I promise you, Margot. I will do everything I can to make sure you do not regret it." They stood there in the snow, holding hands, grinning at each other like fools, and Margot felt something settle in her chest, something that felt like hope, something that felt like coming home. They remounted and continued toward Opal, and now the journey felt different. Samuel pointed out where his land bordered other ranches, talked about his neighbors, about the small community that existed out here in this harsh, beautiful place. He talked about his plans for the ranch, how he wanted to build it up, maybe add another room to the house, improve the barn. He talked like she would be part of those plans, and Margot found she wanted to be. Opal appeared on the horizon just before noon, a small cluster of buildings huddled against the cold. It was not much of a town. A general store, a saloon, a boarding house, a claims office, and perhaps a dozen houses. But it looked solid and real, a place where people had decided to put down roots and make a life. Samuel guided the horse to the claims office, a small wooden building with a sign that read Land Claims and Assay Office. He helped Margot down, and she felt suddenly nervous. This was it. The moment she would find out if her father had finally, after all those years of chasing fool's gold, found something real. "You want me to come in with you?" Samuel asked. Margot nodded. She did not trust her voice. Inside, the office was cramped and overheated, with a small stove burning hot in the corner. A man sat behind a desk covered in papers and ledgers. He looked up as they entered, his eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He was perhaps 50, with gray hair and the ink-stained fingers of someone who spent his life dealing with documents. "Help you?" he asked. "My name is Margot Fletcher," she said, willing her voice to stay steady. "I am here about my father's mining claim, Thomas Fletcher. He died 3 months ago in Denver." The clerk's expression shifted to something like sympathy. "Ah, yes, Fletcher, I heard about that. My condolences, miss. Your father's claim is registered here. Let me pull the file." He rummaged through a cabinet, pulling out a folder thick with papers. He spread them on the desk, and Margot saw her father's familiar scrawling handwriting on some of the documents. It made her chest tight. "Now, the claim itself is legitimate," the clerk said, adjusting his spectacles. "Properly filed and registered. The mineral rights are clear. However—" He paused, looking uncomfortable. There is a matter of outstanding debts. Your father borrowed money from several people in town to work the claim. Equipment, supplies, that sort of thing. Those debts transfer to whoever inherits the claim. Margot's stomach sank. How much? The clerk consulted a ledger. Total of $830. It might as well have been $8,000. Margot had perhaps $40 to her name. I see. However, the clerk continued, the claim does appear to have real value. Your father found a decent silver vein before he left for Denver. If you can work it or find someone to work it, there is money to be made. Enough to pay off the debts and then some. But I cannot work a silver mine, Margot said, feeling helpless. I do not have the knowledge or the equipment or the money to hire people who do. You could sell the claim, the clerk suggested. There are folks in town who might be interested. Though with the debts attached, you would not get full value. Margot looked down at the papers, at her father's signature, at the map showing the location of the claim in the hills outside town. Her father had finally found something real, and now it was going to slip through her fingers because she did not have the resources to hold on to it. How long do I have before the debts come due? She asked. End of December, the clerk said. 3 weeks. After that, the creditors can petition to have the claim seized and sold to cover what is owed. Thank you, Margot said numbly. I need to think about this. They stepped back out into the cold, and Margot felt like she might cry from frustration. So close. Her father had been so close to finally succeeding, and it did not matter because she could not hold onto what he had found. Hey, Samuel said gently, his hand on her shoulder. Talk to me. I cannot keep it, Margot said, the words bitter in her mouth. $800 might as well be $8,000. I cannot pay that, and I cannot work the mine myself. So I will have to sell it for whatever I can get, which probably will not even cover the debts, and I will be right back where I started. Alone and broke with nowhere to go. No, Samuel said firmly. Not alone. Remember. Margot looked up at him, and the steadiness in his eyes made her breath catch. Listen to me, Samuel said. I have some money saved. Not a lot, but some. And I have a friend in town, Jack Morrison, who has worked silver mines. Maybe we can figure something out. A partnership, maybe. You own the claim, I provide some capital, Jack provides the expertise. We work the mine together, split whatever profit there is after the debts are paid. Samuel, I cannot ask you to do that, Margot said, even as hope began to flicker in her chest. That is your money, your savings. What if the mine does not pan out? What if my father was wrong and there is no real silver there? Then I lose some money, Samuel said with a shrug. But Margot, I have been saving for years with no particular goal in mind, just saving because that is what you do. This gives the money purpose. And besides, I am not doing it as charity. I am doing it as an investment, in the mine, yes, but also. He paused, his eyes searching hers. Also in us, in the possibility of us. Margot felt tears prick her eyes, but they were not tears of frustration anymore. You barely know me. So let me get to know you. Let me be part of this. You do not have to do everything alone anymore, Margot. That is what I am trying to tell you. You do not have to be alone. Margot thought about the years of being alone, of depending only on herself, of building walls around her heart to keep from being disappointed. She thought about how exhausting it had been, how lonely. And she thought about Samuel, who had taken her in during a storm, who had been nothing but kind and steady and real, who was standing here offering her not just money but partnership, not just help but hope. Okay, she whispered. Okay, yes, let us try. Samuel's whole face lit up, and before Margot could react, he had pulled her into a hug, lifting her right off her feet and spinning her around. She laughed, startled, her arms going around his neck to hold on. When he set her down, they were both grinning like idiots, and Margot realized she could not remember the last time she had felt this happy, this light. "Come on," Samuel said, taking her hand. "Let us go find Jack and see if we can make this work." They found Jack Morrison at the saloon, eating a late lunch. He was a stocky man in his 40s with a weathered face and shrewd eyes. Samuel explained the situation, and Jack listened carefully, asking occasional questions about the location of the claim and what Thomas Fletcher had found. "I remember your father," Jack said to Margot. "Good man. Knew his geology. If he said there was a real vein, I believe him." He looked at Samuel. "You are serious about this? Putting your money into a mining venture?" "I am," Samuel said. Jack studied them both for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, I am in. But we do this properly. Legal partnership, everything in writing. I will provide expertise and labor, you provide capital, Miss Fletcher provides the claim. Profits split 3 ways after expenses and debts are paid." "Agreed, agreed," Margot and Samuel said together. They spent the rest of the afternoon in the claims office, drawing up the necessary papers. Jack knew a lawyer in town who could make sure everything was legal and binding. By the time the sun was setting, they had a partnership. Margot signed her name to the documents with a hand that only shook a little, and felt like she was signing herself into a future she had not imagined even a week ago. When it was done, Jack shook both their hands. "We will start work as soon as the weather clears enough to get up into the hills. Another week, maybe 2. In the meantime, Miss Fletcher, you will need somewhere to stay in town." "She is staying at my ranch," Samuel said, and there was something possessive in his tone that made Margot's heart skip. He glanced at her. "If that is all right with you." "Yes," Margot said, meeting his eyes. "That is all right with me." Jack gave them both a knowing look but did not comment. They left the saloon and walked through the darkening streets of Opal back to where Samuel had left his horse. The sky was beginning to fill with stars, hard, bright points of light in the vast darkness. It was still brutally cold, but Margot barely felt it. She felt warm from the inside out, lit up with possibility. They rode back to the ranch through the darkness, Margot once again sitting in front of Samuel, his arms around her. But now there was a new awareness between them, an acknowledgement of what was growing. Samuel's hold on her felt more deliberate, more intimate, and Margot let herself lean back against him, accepting the comfort and strength he offered. When they reached the ranch, Samuel tended to the horse while Margot went inside and started warming up food for dinner. It felt natural, moving around his kitchen, setting out plates, putting coffee on to boil, like something she had been doing for years instead of days. Samuel came in stamping snow from his boots and stopped in the doorway, just watching her. Margot looked up and caught him staring. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Nothing, just, you look right here like you belong," he smiled, almost shyly. "I like it." Margot's cheeks heated. "I am just making dinner, I know, but I like that too." Samuel crossed to the stove, standing close to her. "Margot, I know we are taking things fast, maybe too fast, but I do not want there to be any confusion about what I want, what I am hoping for." "What are you hoping for?" Margot asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everything," Samuel said simply. "I am hoping for everything. You here in this house, a partner in my work and in my life, a future that is ours, not just mine." He reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering on her cheek. "I am hoping you might feel the same way." "I do," Margot said, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "I am terrified, but I do. Samuel, I have never let myself want something like this before. It feels dangerous." "It is dangerous," Samuel agreed. "Wanting someone, letting them in, that is the most dangerous thing you can do. But Margot, I think it is also the most important, the most real." They stood there, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. Margot had never wanted to be kissed so badly in her life, but Samuel, gentleman that he was, just smiled and stepped back. "We should eat before the food gets cold." They ate dinner and then sat by the fire, and this time when they talked, there was a new openness between them. Samuel told her about the woman he had courted once, 5 years ago, the daughter of a neighboring rancher, who had ultimately chosen a banker from Cheyenne over a cattle rancher. He told her how it had hurt, but also how he had realized they would not have been happy together, that they had wanted fundamentally different things from life. Margot told him about the few clumsy courtships she had endured, men who had been interested in her father's imagined wealth or her own usefulness, but never in her as a person. She told him how she had learned to keep men at arm's length, to protect herself from disappointment. "I am not like those men," Samuel said quietly. "I see you, Margot, not what you can do for me or what you can provide, just you, and I like what I see." Margot felt tears prick her eyes again. No one has ever said anything like that to me before." "Then no one has been paying attention," Samuel said. "You are strong and smart and brave. You rode through a blizzard alone. You did not give up when you could have. You are willing to take a chance on something uncertain. Those are not small things." That night, when Margot went to bed in the small room, she lay awake for a long time, thinking about Samuel in the next room, thinking about the future that was taking shape, uncertain but full of promise. She thought about her father, about how he had spent his life chasing dreams that always slipped through his fingers. She wondered if he would be happy knowing that his final dream had been real, that it might actually come true for his daughter even though he would not be there to see it. "Thank you, Papa," she whispered into the darkness, "for finally finding something worth finding." The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity and a growing sense of belonging that Margot had never experienced before. Samuel brought her horse to her the day after they returned from Opal, the animal fully recovered. Margot kept the horse in Samuel's barn and helped with the daily work of the ranch, learning the rhythms of the place, the needs of the animals, the endless small tasks that kept everything running. Jack came by every few days to discuss the mining operation. The weather had cleared enough that they were able to make trips up into the hills to assess the claim. Margot went with them, wanting to see the place her father had spent his final months. The claim was in a narrow canyon, sheltered from the worst of the wind, with a decent shaft already dug into the hillside. Jack examined everything with a critical eye, tested the rock samples, and finally declared that Thomas Fletcher had been right. There was a real silver vein here, and with proper working, it could be profitable. They hired 2 local men to help with the actual mining work, and by mid-December, they were bringing out ore to be assayed. The first real numbers came back better than anyone had hoped. After paying off Thomas Fletcher's debts and covering expenses, there would be a significant profit to split among the 3 partners. But for Margot, the mine was almost secondary to what was happening at the ranch. She and Samuel fell into an easy partnership that deepened with every passing day. They worked side by side, cooked together, read in the evenings, talked about everything and nothing. And slowly, carefully, they let themselves grow closer. It started with small touches. Samuel's hand on her lower back as he passed behind her in the kitchen. Margot's fingers brushing his when she handed him a cup of coffee. Their knees touching as they sat by the fire. Each touch was electric, charged with awareness and growing desire. One evening, about 2 weeks after Margot had first arrived, they were sitting close together on the sofa, going over account books for the mining operation. Margot looked up to ask Samuel a question and found him already looking at her, his expression soft and full of something that made her breath catch. "Samuel," she whispered. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, his voice rough. "I've been wanting to kiss you since about 5 minutes after you walked into my barn, but I did not want to rush you, did not want to make you uncomfortable, but Margot, I really, really want to kiss you." Margot laughed, a little breathlessly. "Yes, please. Yes." Samuel cupped her face in his hands, his palms warm and calloused, and kissed her. It was gentle at first, almost tentative, just a soft press of lips. But then Margot made a small sound in the back of her throat and pressed closer, and the kiss deepened. Samuel's arms came around her, pulling her against him, and Margot wound her arms around his neck, kissing him back with all the pent-up longing of the past 2 weeks. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "I am falling in love with you," he said. "I think I have been falling in love with you since you walked out of that blizzard and into my life." "I am falling in love with you too," Margot whispered. "It terrifies me, but I am." "Do not be terrified," Samuel said, pressing a kiss to her forehead, then her nose, then her lips again, soft and sweet. "I will catch you. I promise." They kissed for a long time that evening, learning each other, exploring this new dimension of their relationship. Samuel was respectful, never pushing for more than Margot was ready to give, but there was passion beneath his gentleness. A promise of more to come when the time was right. Christmas came, and Margot spent it at the ranch with Samuel. They roasted a goose that one of Samuel's neighbors had given them, and Samuel gave Margot a beautiful leather journal that he had ordered from Cheyenne. Inside the front cover, he had written in his neat, precise hand, "For Margot, may all your future days be worth recording." Margot gave him a thick wool scarf she had knitted in secret during the evenings when he was out doing chores. It was not perfect. Her stitches were uneven in places, but Samuel wrapped it around his neck like it was made of gold, and the look he gave her was worth more than any expensive gift. They kissed under the lantern light, and Samuel said, "This is the best Christmas I have ever had." "Mine too," Margot said, and meant it with her whole heart. By the end of December, the debts on the mining claim were paid off and the mine was producing steadily. Margot's share of the profits was growing. She could leave now if she wanted, could take her money and go to San Francisco or anywhere else she had dreamed of going. The thought did not even tempt her. One evening in early January, Samuel and Margot were sitting by the fire after dinner. Outside, snow was falling again, but gently this time, not the violent blizzard that had first brought them together. Samuel was holding Margot's hand, absently tracing patterns on her palm with his thumb. "Margot," he said, "I need to ask you something." She looked up at him, her heart already knowing what was coming, already knowing her answer. "I know it has only been a month. I know people will say that is not enough time, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life." He shifted, pulling something from his pocket. It was a simple gold band, worn smooth with age. "This was my mother's ring. My father gave it to her when they married, and she wore it until the day she died. My sister said I should keep it, for when I found the right person." "Samuel," Margot breathed, her eyes filling with tears. "Margot Fletcher, will you marry me? Will you stay here and build a life with me? Will you let me love you for the rest of our days?" "Yes," Margot said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, absolutely yes." Samuel slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, like it had been made for her. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply, and Margot felt like her heart might burst from the joy of it. They were married 3 weeks later, in a small ceremony in Opal with Jack Morrison and Samuel's sister and her family in attendance. Margot wore a simple dress of deep blue, and Samuel wore his best suit. The local preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and when Samuel kissed her, everyone cheered. The reception was held at the saloon, which had been cleaned and decorated for the occasion. The whole town turned out, curious about the woman who had arrived in a blizzard and captured the heart of one of their most eligible bachelors. But if there was gossip about the speed of their courtship, it was mostly good-natured. People could see the way Samuel and Margot looked at each other, the way they moved together like two parts of a whole, and most agreed that sometimes, when you knew, you knew. They spent their wedding night at the ranch, in the house that was now Margot's home as much as Samuel's. Samuel carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing, and then set her down gently in front of the fire. "Hello, wife," he said, his voice full of wonder and love. "Hello, husband," Margot replied and kissed him. They made love that night with tenderness and passion, learning each other in this new way, taking their time despite the urgency of their desire. Afterward, lying in Samuel's arms in the bed they would now share, Margot felt a peace she had never known. She was home. Finally, after years of wandering, she was home. The first year of their marriage was not without challenges. The mining operation had some setbacks in the spring when part of the tunnel collapsed and had to be shored up. There was a dry summer that worried everyone, though Samuel's cattle managed to pull through. Margot had to learn the 1,000 small skills involved in running a ranch household, and there were days when she felt overwhelmed and inadequate. But through it all, Samuel was there. Patient when she burned dinner, encouraging when she struggled with some task, proud when she succeeded. And Margot discovered that she loved this life, loved the hard work and the changing seasons, loved the community they were part of, loved building something real and lasting with the man she loved. The mining claim continued to produce steadily throughout that first year. Margot's partnership with Samuel and Jack proved fruitful in every way. The profits were split fairly, and Margot and Samuel were able to make the improvements to the ranch that Samuel had talked about. They added 2 new rooms to the house, including a proper bedroom and a small office where Margot could keep the books for both the ranch and the mining operation. They improved the barn, adding more stalls. They bought more cattle. But more than the material success, Margot found herself growing in ways she had not expected. She had spent so much of her life defending herself, keeping people at arm's length, never letting herself be vulnerable. With Samuel, she learned to let those walls down. She learned to ask for help when she needed it, to share her fears and doubts, to accept love and support without feeling weak. And Samuel, who had been alone for so long, blossomed with Margot in his life. He smiled more, laughed more, talked about dreams and plans for the future in a way his sister later told Margot he had never done before. Having Margot as his partner made him realize how lonely he had been, even though he had not fully acknowledged it at the time. In the spring of their second year together, Margot realized she was pregnant. She told Samuel one evening after dinner, nervous despite knowing he would be happy. His reaction did not disappoint. He let out a whoop of joy, picked her up and spun her around, then immediately set her down carefully, worried he had been too rough. "Are you all right? Is the baby all right? Should you be standing? Do you need to sit down?" He fussed and Margot laughed, so full of love for this man that she could hardly contain it. "I am fine. We are fine. It is still early, but yes, we are going to have a baby." Samuel pulled her close, more gently this time, and Margot could feel him trembling. "A baby," he whispered. "We are going to have a baby." The pregnancy was not easy. Margot was sick for the first few months, and Samuel worried constantly, hovering and fretting until Margot had to gently tell him to give her some space to breathe. But his concern came from love, and Margot tried to be patient with it even when it drove her a little crazy. As her belly grew, so did Samuel's wonder. He would spend evenings with his hand on her stomach, feeling the baby kick, talking to their child through Margot's skin. He read everything he could find about childbirth and babies, pestered the doctor in Opal with questions, and generally drove everyone around him slightly mad with his preparations. Their son was born in November, just as the first snows were beginning to fall. The birth was long and difficult, and there were moments when both Margot and Samuel were terrified. But in the end, the baby was healthy, with a strong set of lungs and his father's dark hair. They named him Thomas, after Margot's father, and Samuel cried when he held his son for the first time, tears of joy and relief and overwhelming love. Watching Samuel with their baby, seeing the tenderness with which he held the tiny boy, the wonder in his eyes, Margot fell in love with her husband all over again. This man, who was so strong and capable in the harsh world of the Wyoming frontier, was so gentle with their son, so patient, so devoted. "Thank you," Samuel said one night as they sat together in the firelight, the baby sleeping in Margot's arms. "Thank you for coming into my life. Thank you for staying. Thank you for giving me this. Thank you for finding me in that blizzard," Margot replied softly. "Thank you for inviting me into your home. Thank you for showing me what love could be." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their son sleep, and Margot thought about the path that had led her here. All those years of wandering, of loneliness, of following her father's failed dreams, it had all been leading to this. To a blizzard in Wyoming, to a barn and a kind cowboy, to a love she had not known she was searching for. The mining claim eventually played out, as silver claims did, but by then, Margot and Samuel had other sources of income. The ranch was thriving, and they had used the mining profits wisely, investing in more land and better stock. Jack Morrison moved on to other opportunities but remained a friend, stopping by whenever he was in the area to meet the new baby and catch up on news. As Thomas grew from a baby into a toddler, Margot and Samuel talked about having more children. Their second child, a daughter they named Sarah after Samuel's mother, was born 2 years after Thomas. She had her mother's gray eyes and her father's steady temperament. 2 years after that, another son arrived whom they named Henry. The house that had once felt empty with just Samuel rattled now with the sounds of children playing, arguing, laughing. Margot discovered that motherhood suited her in ways she had not expected. She had worried during her first pregnancy that she would not know how to be a mother, having lost her own so young. But she found that love and patience and a willingness to learn were enough. Samuel was a devoted father, present and engaged with his children in a way that many men of that era were not. He taught them to ride, to care for animals, to respect the land, and the hard work required to make a living from it. And Margot taught them to read and write and think for themselves, to question and explore and never stop learning. The years passed, marked by the rhythms of ranch life. Harsh winters and dry summers, good years and lean years, triumphs and setbacks. Samuel's sister visited regularly with her growing family, and the cousins became close. Margot made friends among the other ranch wives in the area, women who understood the challenges of frontier life and supported each other through them. Opal grew slowly, adding a school and a church and a proper doctor's office. Thomas and Sarah and Henry attended the school, riding the 5 miles each way with other ranch children. Margot sometimes helped teach when the regular teacher was overwhelmed with students of varying ages and abilities. Through it all, the love between Margot and Samuel deepened and matured. The initial passion settled into something steadier but no less powerful. They knew each other's moods and habits, could communicate with a glance, worked together as a seamless team. They still made time for each other, stealing moments alone when the children were asleep, taking rides across the ranch land, sitting together in the evening firelight. They had their disagreements, of course. No marriage was without conflict. There were times when Margot's independence clashed with Samuel's protectiveness, times when the stress of ranch life and raising children made them short with each other. But they had learned early on to talk through their problems, to listen to each other, to remember that they were on the same side even when they disagreed on the details. One evening when Thomas was 10, Sarah was 8, and Henry was 6, the family sat around the dinner table and Thomas asked about how his parents had met. "Did Papa save you from the blizzard?" Thomas asked, his eyes wide. He had heard bits and pieces of the story before, but never the whole thing. Margot and Samuel exchanged a smile. "He did," Margot said. "I was riding to Opal in the middle of a terrible storm, and I would have died if I had not found your father's barn." "And Papa let you stay in the house instead of the barn?" Sarah asked. "He did," Margot confirmed. "Even though he did not know me at all, he invited me into his home and took care of me." "That is because Papa is a hero," Henry declared with the certainty of a 6-year-old. Samuel laughed, a little embarrassed. "I am not a hero. I just did what anyone would have done." "Not everyone would have," Margot said softly, meeting her husband's eyes across the table. "Not everyone would have been so kind to a stranger. Not everyone would have seen possibility instead of burden. You saved my life that night, Samuel, in more ways than you know." Later, after the children were in bed, Margot and Samuel stood on the porch, looking out at the land they had built together. The moon was full, casting silver light across the snow-covered fields. In the distance, they could hear cattle lowing, and closer, the soft sounds of the horses in the barn. "You ever regret it?" Samuel asked. "Staying here instead of going to San Francisco or somewhere more civilized?" Margot turned to him, surprised. "Never, not once." "Do you regret asking me to stay?" "Not for a single second," Samuel said, pulling her close. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Margot Frost. You and those 3 wild children of ours." "They are your children," Margot teased. "The wildness comes from you. The intelligence comes from you," Samuel countered, "as does the stubbornness." They stood together in the cold night air, wrapped in each other's arms, and Margot thought about that day 12 years ago when a blizzard had forced her into a barn, and a cowboy had offered her shelter in his home instead. She thought about how that single act of kindness had changed the entire course of her life, had given her everything she had never dared to hope for. "I love you," she said. "I will love you until the day I die and beyond." "I love you too," Samuel replied, kissing her forehead. Forever and always. The years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and new joys. Thomas grew into a responsible young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Sarah proved to be brilliant with numbers and helped Margot manage the increasingly complex finances of their growing operation. Henry was the wild one, always exploring, always asking questions, always pushing boundaries. When Thomas was 18, he began courting a neighbor's daughter, a sensible girl named Emma who was not afraid of hard work. Samuel and Margot watched their oldest son fall in love with a mixture of pride and wistfulness, remembering their own courtship. "We are getting old," Samuel said one evening, watching Thomas ride off to visit Emma. "Speak for yourself," Margot replied, but she knew what he meant. They were in their 40s now, no longer young, their bodies bearing the marks of hard work and the passage of time. But they were healthy and strong, and they had built a life worth living. Sarah left for college in Cheyenne when she was 19, one of the first women in the territory to pursue higher education. Margot was intensely proud, though she missed her daughter terribly. Sarah came home during summers and holidays, full of new ideas and energy, and Margot loved hearing about her daughter's studies and aspirations. Henry, true to his restless nature, announced at 17 that he wanted to travel, to see something of the world beyond Wyoming. Samuel was hesitant, worried about his youngest son heading off into the unknown, but Margot understood. She had been a wanderer once too, and she knew that Henry needed to find his own path, just as she had found hers. "Let him go," she told Samuel. "He will come back. This land is in his blood, whether he knows it yet or not." Henry left in the spring, promising to write, promising to come home. True to his word, letters arrived regularly from cities and towns across the West. And 2 years later, he did come home, older and wiser, ready to settle down and help run the ranch. Thomas married Emma in a ceremony that brought together families from across the county. The young couple built a house on the far side of the ranch property, and within a year, Samuel and Margot became grandparents. Holding their first grandchild, a baby girl named Margot after her grandmother, Samuel looked at his wife with tears in his eyes. "We did it," he said. "We built something real, something that will last." "We did," Margot agreed, her own eyes wet. "We really did." Sarah eventually married a lawyer she met in Cheyenne and settled there, but she visited often, bringing her husband and eventually her own children to stay at the ranch for weeks at a time. The house was always full of people, of laughter and noise and life. Henry surprised everyone by falling in love with the new schoolteacher in Opal, a practical woman from Ohio who could ride as well as any ranch wife, and who was not intimidated by the rough frontier life. They married and built a house in Opal, where Henry worked as a deputy sheriff while still helping out at the ranch during busy seasons. As Samuel and Margot entered their 50s and then their 60s, they gradually turned over more of the daily running of the ranch to Thomas and Emma. But they remained active and involved, still rising early to watch the sun come up over the land they loved, still riding out to check on cattle, still working side by side as they had always done. One winter evening, nearly 30 years after Margot had first stumbled into Samuel's barn during a blizzard, they sat together by the fire in the house that had grown and changed with their family. Outside, snow fell gently, the world quiet and peaceful. "You remember that first night?" Samuel asked, holding Margot's hand. "When you came out of the storm?" "Every detail," Margot said. "I remember thinking I was going to die, and then I saw your barn and then you. I remember how kind you were, how you said I could stay in your home instead of the barn." "Best decision I ever made," Samuel said. "Inviting you in." "Best decision I ever made accepting," Margot replied. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire, their hands intertwined. They had built a good life together through hard work and love and commitment. They had raised 3 children who were now raising children of their own. They had survived droughts and harsh winters, economic downturns and personal losses. They had built something that would outlast them, a legacy of love and determination. "I would do it all again," Samuel said suddenly. "Every bit of it, every challenge, every hardship, because it led me to you and to this life we have built." "So would I," Margot said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I would walk through 1,000 blizzards if I knew you were waiting at the end." They grew old together, as people do. Samuel's hair went completely gray, and his hands, while still strong, began to show the tremor of age. Margot's face lined with the marks of years spent outdoors, squinting against sun and wind, but her gray eyes remained sharp and clear. They slowed down, as bodies must, but they never stopped moving forward, never stopped caring for each other and the land and the family they had built. On a spring morning when Margot was 68 and Samuel was 73, they rode out together across the ranch, something they still did when weather and health permitted. They stopped on a high ridge overlooking the valley, the same ridge where Samuel had first brought Margot years ago to show her the extent of his land. "It is beautiful," Margot said, as she always did. "It is," Samuel agreed, "but not as beautiful as you," Margot laughed. "You old fool. I am wrinkled and gray and my hands are ruined from work." "You are perfect," Samuel said seriously. "You have always been perfect. From that first moment I saw you in my barn, half frozen and stubborn as hell, you have been perfect." Margot felt tears prick her eyes. After all these years, he could still make her cry with his words. "I love you, Samuel Frost. I have loved you for 30 years, and I will love you for however many more years we have. And I love you, Margot Frost. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. The blizzard that brought you to me was the greatest gift I ever received." They sat on their horses on that ridge, holding hands, looking out over the land they had worked and loved and shared. Below them, they could see Thomas and Emma's house, smoke rising from the chimney. In the distance, the town of Opal had grown into something substantial, with real streets and shops and even a small railroad depot. But here, on this ridge, it was just the two of them, as it had been at the beginning. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life and a love that had weathered every storm. "Ready to head back?" Samuel asked after a while. "Ready," Margot said. They rode back to the ranch together, side by side, the way they had done everything for 30 years. When they reached the barn, Samuel helped Margot dismount, his hands gentle and familiar. They tended to the horses together, working in the easy synchrony of two people who knew each other's movements by heart. As they walked from the barn to the house, Samuel took Margot's hand, and she laced her fingers through his. The house ahead of them was warm and welcoming, smoke rising from the chimney, lamplight glowing in the windows. Inside, they knew their family would gather soon for Sunday dinner. Children and grandchildren, the noise and chaos and love that came with a large family. But for this moment, it was just the two of them, walking hand in hand toward the home they had built together. Toward the life they had created from a chance meeting during a blizzard, from a cowboy's kindness and a woman's courage, from love that had grown and deepened and endured. Margot looked at Samuel, at his weathered face and kind eyes, and felt a surge of gratitude so strong it nearly took her breath away. For the storm that had brought her here, for the man who had taken her in, for every moment of the life they had shared. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" Samuel asked. "For everything," Margot said. "For that first night, for every night since, for loving me, for building this life with me, for being exactly who you are." Samuel stopped and turned to face her, cupping her face in his hands the way he had that first time he kissed her, all those years ago. "The thanks should be mine. You made me whole, Margot. Before you, I did not even know I was incomplete." He kissed her then, gentle and sweet, and Margot kissed him back, pouring 30 years of love into it. When they broke apart, they were both smiling, both with tears in their eyes. They continued toward the house, toward the life waiting for them there. A life full of family and love, and all the rich complexity of years lived fully and well. A life that had begun with a blizzard and a barn and a simple offer. "You can stay in my home instead." And Margot had stayed. She had stayed and built a home and a family and a love that would be remembered and talked about for generations. Their grandchildren would tell their own children about the great-grandparents who had met during a blizzard, who had fallen in love in a matter of days, who had built something beautiful and lasting from that chance encounter. The story would become family legend, embellished and romanticized over time, but the truth at its heart would remain. Two people, brought together by fate and storm, who chose each other and kept choosing each other, day after day, year after year, through everything life threw at them. As Margot and Samuel climbed the steps to their porch, the door opened and their family spilled out to greet them. Thomas and Emma with their children, Henry with his wife and their brood, even Sarah, who had come from Cheyenne for the weekend with her family. The noise was tremendous. Everyone talking at once, children running and laughing, the whole beautiful chaos of a family gathering. Samuel squeezed Margot's hand, and she squeezed back. No words were needed. They both knew how lucky they were, how blessed, how rare it was to find what they had found. Inside, the house was warm and full of light and love. Dinner was laid out on the big table Samuel had built years ago, enough food to feed their growing family. Children were settled, plates were filled, and conversation flowed around them like a river, constant and nourishing. Margot sat at her place at the table, Samuel beside her, and looked around at the faces of the people they had brought into the world or into their family. This was their legacy, she thought. Not just the ranch or the land, though those were important, but this. These people, these relationships, this love that would ripple outward through generations. After dinner, as evening fell and the family lingered over coffee and pie, someone asked again for the story of how Margot and Samuel had met. The children never tired of hearing it, and Margot never tired of telling it. "It was the worst storm I had ever seen," she began, and Samuel picked up the thread, and together they told the story they had told 100 times before. But it never got old because it was their story, the foundation of everything they had built. When the story was finished, little Margot, their eldest grandchild, now 10 years old, said, "That is the most romantic story ever, like a fairy tale." "Better than a fairy tale," Samuel said, looking at his wife, "because it is real, and because it did not end with a wedding. It started with one." "The best stories do not end," Margot added. "They keep going, changing and growing, making new chapters. Our story is still being written even now." The family eventually dispersed. Children were taken home to bed. Goodbyes were said. Thomas and Emma returned to their house across the property. Henry and his family headed back to Opal. Sarah and her family retired to the guest rooms for the night. Finally, Samuel and Margot were alone again in the quiet house. They prepared for bed with the comfortable routine of long marriage. Samuel banked the fire for the night while Margot put away the last of the dishes. They met in their bedroom, the one they had shared for 3 decades, and helped each other with buttons and laces the way they always did. In bed, Margot curled into Samuel's side, her head on his chest, his arm around her shoulders. His heartbeat was steady and strong beneath her ear, a sound as familiar as her own breathing. "Good night, my love," Samuel murmured, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Good night," Margot replied. "I will see you in the morning." "Every morning," Samuel said, "for as many mornings as we have left. And then every morning after that in whatever comes next," Margot added. They fell asleep that way, wrapped in each other's arms, surrounded by the life they had built, secure in the love that had sustained them through everything. Outside, snow began to fall again, gentle and steady, blanketing the world in white. But inside, the house was warm, the fire still glowing, the people within safe and loved and home. The blizzard had brought Margot to Samuel's barn all those years ago, and the cowboy had said she could stay in his home instead. She had stayed, and in staying, she had found everything she had been searching for without knowing it. Love and home and purpose and family. A life worth living, a love worth having, a story worth telling. And as the snow fell and the years passed, and the love endured, that story continued to unfold, proving that sometimes the greatest journeys begin with a storm and a stranger's kindness, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is accept the shelter offered and stay to see what tomorrow might bring. In the end, that was their story. Simple and profound, ordinary and extraordinary, a tale of two people who found each other in the wilderness and built a life that mattered. The blizzard had forced her into his barn, but love had brought her home. And that home, built on foundations of kindness and courage and enduring love, would stand for generations. A testament to what two people could create when they chose each other and kept choosing each other. Through every storm, every season, every moment of their shared lives. And they lived, truly lived, happily ever after.